This is Space Cat's Peace Turtles, the unofficial podcast for Fantasy Flight's Twilight Imperium.
Episode 61, Fleet Composition.
Music by Ben Prunty, featuring Matt Martins and Hunter Donaldson. Boy, howdy. This is a different experience for me.
Yeah. It's not great. I don't love it.
It is 8:52 on a breezy Sunday morning, and Matt's got his yerba mate tea, and he's just trying to will up the energy to talk about spaceships.
Yeah. I think the spaceships are the dumbest part. I'm going to go ahead and say that. I'm going to throw that out there. The spaceships.
I would love you to elaborate.
I just think the spaceships are dumb. And I think also the fact that there's so many different types is silly. I think that I would have like two ships.
And you'd rather them be horses.
Well, they'd be horses or cars. It'd be like you got your Ford and you got your Chevy and then your Dodge. And the Fords, they hit at a 7. But they sustain damage. Aha, changing things up. And
Chevy's a 4x4.
Right. And something about a Hemi. Actually, that's how this... Okay, so we've got a game. It's called Space Truck. Space Truck. And the way Space Truck works... I know there's a game called Galaxy Trucker, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about our new game called Space Truck, where... all of the factions are American and only American car companies, so they suck, and they just fly through space. And
right
now I'm bored with it. But
here, let me redo the intro then. Hey everyone, welcome to Space Truck's Peace Alternators. Now, if you pop that thing open, let me tell you, all you gotta do is pop that thing open, and it's your alternator now. Okay, so you're just gonna have to rip that thing right out. All right.
It's called Space Truck's Peace Nuts. That's what it's called. It's called Space Truck's Peace Nuts. Or just, you know what?
It's your fuse box. Let me tell you, those things are just that. If you get one of them Mitsubishis, the fuse boxes just never stick.
It's the spark plugs, man. Your spark plugs are all messed up. Have I talked about how my car broke down on the show already?
No.
Did I talk about that?
I don't have a car anymore.
I don't have a car. I don't have a car because it ran out of oil, and that makes so I took it in. It broke.
That makes the car no-go.
Well, what happened was I took it to the place and I was like, what is broken with this car? And they were like, it's the engine part. And I'm like, but that's the part that makes it go in the first place. And then they were like, yeah, we can replace that engine for $4,000. And I was like, I could just get a car,
Yeah.
For $4,000. I mean, not a good car, but a car.
You should have given it the go juice. Why'd you stop giving it the go juice?
No, because it just broke and it's old. And God, we were so smooth last week.
Yeah,
I listened to the episode and I was like, dang, this is like we're like on autopilot, just like killing it. Last week I thought was great.
Well, let's just do this, Hunter. Let's talk about the ships that do go. Today is a Galactic Council episode. Today's a Galactic Council episode, and it was a weird runoff for the Galactic Council. There has been a coalition that has been formed to further the desire of a homebrew episode or a house rules episode.
That's cool.
And I thought for sure that was going to happen because they've been a very vocal, coalition on the Discord, but when we put the thing up, boy, fleet composition blew everything out of the water. So to all you house rule homebrew people, not this month.
Right. I don't honestly.
That one's been getting put off for like 4 months. I'll go ahead and throw that out there.
And I don't feel prepared to talk about it, honestly. I feel like there hasn't been. We're still so early in the TI4 homebrew. There's not a lot out there to talk about, but I guess we could kind of collect all the stuff that is out there.
Yeah,
give it a go.
I think it's less about specific like reviewing specific house rules and homebrew stuff. I think it's more a discussion of what homebrew could be, but that's not what the episode is. So let's shut up already.
Right, yeah.
And let's talk about spaceships in space.
Can I say the one I wanted to win before we actually get into it?
Yeah. There were three options.
Yeah, I wanted to do the action card one because we still haven't done that, and I just like to do that.
Hunter just wants to.
And that was like what that one didn't even.
And read action cards and analyze them.
Yeah, that's some content right there. And like people would appreciate it too.
Yeah, okay.
I'm forming my own coalition in the Galactic Council to get action cards next. I don't want to do homebrew yet.
That would require you to show up in the Discord.
All right, well, I won't do it then. But but I will talk about doing it.
Fair enough. But let's talk about what are we going to do with this fleet composition conversation? Because here's the thing about Hunter and I is we are not mathematicians.
Right.
And I feel like to do a really good fleet composition episode, it would be discussing odds and statistics and viability of certain ships. But that's not really our
No, that's not our department.
Forte.
Yeah.
And honestly, I welcome that as Errata, or it's almost not even Errata at this point. It's like, hey, give us some numbers so we can talk about it in next week's Errata. But I mean, all we did is we pulled up the Alpha Mouse battle calculator, which if you don't know what that is, if you go to alphamou.se/TI4CALC calc, that's the battle calculator. I'll post the link in the Reddit description and stuff like that. But when Hunter and I are playing a game, that's what we have pulled up.
Right.
And anytime you've got like a really dicey battle that you want to, it's like, oh, it's just these two big fleets, and I have no idea who would have the upper hand here. It's really easy to just plug in a bunch of ships against each other and see what your odds are.
Right.
And it helps me inform a lot of my decision. If we've talked about it before too. Hunter's if it's not 80% chance or higher, that's not something Hunter wants to do. And for me, it's more like 60%, and I'm willing to go for it.
Right. Because you're crazy.
But we're not even going to talk about odds and dice rolls and stuff like that today. We're going to go more into just like, what is each ship's role within a fleet? So I think it's really important to say there is no like perfect fleet composition, and we'll talk a little bit. We'll break that down a little bit more later. But it's not like every faction has like an ideal fleet.
No.
It's more about what you can afford and getting what is best,
right,
with the money that you have available to you. So most factions' fleet composition is determined purely by, I had 5 resources and 4 production capacity. I need to spend that optimally. So
what's the best way to spend that, you think, in your opinion? So let's say,
what did I just say?
You said 5 resources, 4 capacity.
Well, again, it depends on who it is. But
do you have Sarween? Let's say you don't.
No.
You don't have Sarween.
I would get carrier, 2 fighter, 4 capacity. This is a fun game. Carrier, cruiser, 2 ground forces.
All right. I'm with it. Carrier, cruiser.
That's not what this whole episode is going to be. It's just like, okay, now 10 resources, 6 capacity.
Right. That would have been a way to do this, though. And I think that would have been, you guys know that is like kind of my flavor of episode. It's for us to do just like actual theory, no crafting, just literal like simulation. That's what I want to do. I want to roll dice today.
No, we're gonna go into each unit and talk about its role in a fleet, and so based on your needs, figuring out where each of those ships lies in your sort of priority.
Right.
And there's going to be some faction considerations as well. So let's dive into some ships. The first thing we want to do is like go over really like the purpose of each ship within a fleet. Like why is it even there? Why would you build it? What's the point of even having each specific ship? And to framework all of that, the whole point of a fleet in the end is to score points. Like the whole board game of Twilight Imperium is about scoring points. So your fleets have to follow that same logic of just like the only reason you have that fleet is to score points with it. It is not to make the fleet that hits the hardest so that you win the most space battles. It's the fleet that can score the most points.
Yeah, but what if I just want to have a cool fleet? and that's all. Like, I just want to have a cool fleet.
You can do that, Hunter, but you're gonna lose. You're gonna lose the board game.
No, I'll win because I'm playing my own game, and it's called Hunter's Got a Cool Fleet. Hunter's got a brand new fleet.
Hunter's got two. Oh, are you doing that song again?
What song?
No, I'm not. I won't go there.
What song? Whoa, wait, what song?
No.
What
Hunter's
song?
got a brand new fleet.
I wasn't doing that song before. Remember, I was doing no, I was doing.
I'm not talking about last week. I have to move on because I can't get in. Now you're the one who sings too much.
I don't sing at all. Bad.
Hunter, what's the bread and butter of a fleet? What's the core? What is the whole reason fleets exist? What ship matters more than all of the other ships?
The car.
That's correct. The car.
The carrier.
The carrier.
Which we're gonna call the car now, and that'll be a new thing.
That's final. The car.
My
everyone's
car.
got their car.
Yeah.
Some factions have a huge van, but we've just got our Toyota Prius.
Right.
And it's here, and it's not doing very much by itself. It's very small.
Yeah.
And it doesn't hit very hard. If a big truck came by and hit it, your Prius is gone.
But it's not about what the car is itself. It's about what's under the hood. What it's got, what it's got in it, what it's carrying.
What's it carrying? Well, it's carrying your babies. It's carrying your little children.
Yeah.
And your little children are going to go invade a planet and kill all of the people that live on that planet.
Oh, God. Your children are violent. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Violent children. No, the carrier exists to take planets and to carry fighters to protect fleets, right?
Right. They're either helping you take the planets, filling out that necessity. Which it's always kind of a bummer for the fleet that they have to do that, right? Because ground forces obviously are not helping you in your fleet composition. Right. So there's always a decision to make with your cars as to how many boys you're going to put in that car versus how many fighters you're going to put in that car.
Right. How many girls are you going to put in that car?
Right.
We just.
And the thing is, most of the cars are sedans, so they're just 4-door, and. Some of them get bigger, and you can make them bigger, but some
factions got a big car.
Most factions start with just a little old sedan, and you got to stuff them all in there. Thankfully, there's no coupes, but.
Well, there's one faction that's got big beefy coupes, but we'll get into that.
Yeah.
So your car is either. Driving down the highway solo because it's the beginning of the game and you just need 2 cars and 4 boys.
Right.
And you're taking planets.
Right.
Or mid to late game, the entire purpose of a fleet is to protect your car.
Right.
And so
your car has your fighters and those are the hits.
Sure, it's also protection. So Hunter, when and why do you build a car?
Because you just need the capacity. That's really all it's doing. It's just about that capacity.
Right. And so my general rule of thumb, if people are wanting, we're not going to do build orders this episode, but I will say if I don't have 2 carriers, I am going to build another carrier as soon as possible.
Yeah.
If one of my carriers got killed mid-game and now I'm down to 1, I need to make sure I have at least a second one. 3 is always great, but sometimes 3, you get left with these decisions of like, oh, I have this extra carrier and I actually don't know what I'm doing with it, or I'm just going to put it, I've got 2 carriers flying together. But the need is for 2 carriers at all times.
Right. I mean, generally speaking, if you don't have a car, then you're not going to be able to take advantage of openings. Like if somebody's left a planet out there with 1 dude on it, and then you've got a car loaded up with 3 boys, and you send that car over. That's something that'll happen.
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm going to insist on cars. Happen. Yeah, that's something that'll happen. I'm doing a good job.
Let's talk about what cars. Besides boys, they're always carrying fighters, right?
Right.
So let's talk about fighters. What are fighters' roles? The first and most important thing is obviously fighters don't take up fleet supply. So in terms of fleet composition, your fighters are wholly dependent on how many cars you have.
Right.
So and there's plenty of times. I know I'm in plenty of situations where I need to go take a planet, and that planet is Sol or something, and it's got 3 ground forces on it. My car is going to be completely full of ground forces, so I actually can't consider bringing fighters.
Right.
But when do you decide, okay, I'm only going to bring 1 or 2 ground forces and I want to fill the rest out with fighters? What are we doing with these fighters, and why would we need them over more ground forces?
Well, I think that choice between fighters and between boys and girls is between infantry and fighters is this, what's the purpose of this fleet? Are we taking planets for a control objective, or do I need to bust up somebody else's fleet? Like, is it about winning the space battle, or is it about winning the land battle, the ground invasion, the invasion combat?
Right.
And you have to kind of, what sucks about that and what's so difficult, I think, about that decision is that you sometimes have to make the call way before you're going to actually use these units. And so sometimes you'll end up out like you've built your fleet or whatever, you've moved it out, and you realize you don't have enough, infantry, you don't have enough ground forces.
Right.
So you don't have enough fighters sometimes to beat, to win in because a lot of times what's weird is like people will build out fleets that, have like a certain amount of dreadnoughts or whatever. But a lot of times the fighters, because of how many hits they can soak, if you're going up against a fleet where you're not going to outgun them, but you can take more hits, obviously that, like, a lot of times that will make a huge difference.
Right. Yeah, you can win a battle with all units that hit on 8s and 9s, but because you had 10 of them versus the opponent's 4,
right?
That's it. I mean, you're going to win that fight. So yeah, that gets at the absolute main purpose of a fighter is literally to die. The fighters are there to be the cheapest thing that can take a hit.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to put a hit on your cruisers and destroyers and everything else. It's just there to be armor. But for some factions, or just in some situations, it's also there to kind of be a swarm, right? I mean, you might just build a ton of fighters, and that's even more what we're saying here is like, I am going to overwhelm you with units as opposed to hit you harder. I'm just going to bring too much stuff for you to be able to deal with. Mm-hmm. And that also kind of gets into the Nalu gum situation of like, sometimes you just leave fighters in all these different places because people can't pass through them unless they have light wave deflectors. Like you just pepper cheap fighters all over. If you have fighter 2, you throw them all over the place, and you've kind of reinforced your boundaries.
It's honestly a good thing to do, even if you're not Nalu, because that's such a cheap way to just make sure that people have to actually activate your systems in order to like get through your slice. I know I made a mistake the last game that I played, the Gideon Brotherhood game, of not leaving a ship in between me and my neighbor, and it allowed my neighbor to get to my home system.
Yeah, ditto. And even more so, like, I try to always leave at least one fighter above every space dock. Because at least, I mean, it's not like one fighter is going to make a huge difference, but at least they can't just bring a lone carrier to take your planet. At the very least, they have to bring enough to kill that fighter. Mm-hmm. So 1 or 2 fighters above so a space dock can hold up to 3 fighters. So it's nice to have 3 fighters hovering above every space dock at the very least. Right. Because that's going to save you some hits, and you might be able to protect yourself. Hunter, when do you build fighters?
When do you build fighters? I think you just build fighters as you go, basically. Yeah. I mean, they should just be like kind of filling out, like, as you're having to build like fleets for any reason, ships for any reason. You should, like, my rule of thumb, actually, I just always, and this actually might be a bad instinct in some cases, but I always consider Sarween to be either for fighters or for infantry. Right. I don't know if other people do that, but that's how I think.
We've said that before, too, specifically with ground forces, of like, you should always just build 2 because ground forces and planet control is so important. Mm-hmm. But I think there is some value in sometimes allocating that for fighters. And yeah, I agree, too, of you have to be building them constantly because almost every faction does not have a high enough production capacity, the amount of ships you can build in one activation. Right. So it's not like you can build all the fighters when you need them later. You would be wasting an entire build action to build 6 fighters.
Yeah, and like
which is like not efficient at all.
Right. And they have enough utility. Like you never don't need fighters. They're never useless.
Right.
So like you might as well always throw, some in there. Like
Right.
I always just try and build like a Dreadnought or a cruiser or something, and then that last resource, just filling out the rest of the production capacity.
Right. And that's the other main time is when you're low on resources, but you have plenty of production capacity. If you're like a double docked Sardakk Nor, you got pretty high production capacity, but maybe you have like 4 resources. Okay, well, a carrier and like 4 or 6 fighters is great. That's going to do you a lot of good.
Right.
So I think that's a pretty common thing. Is just like I have more production capacity than I have resources. Looks like this round I'm building fighters.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to build as many next round. You can if you get more money later, you can build the bigger stuff later.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Let's talk about the hardest unit to talk about.
Yeah.
Destroyers are not great. They have their purpose, but they are not good units. I mean, they're not. They hit on a 9. They have anti-fighter barrage, so obviously one purpose of a destroyer is just like, well, my opponent has fighters, and I need to be able. I would like to be able to kill some of those before the combat starts.
Yeah, now, but are you even going to? Like,
right? Are you even going to? Because you're hitting on a 9.
Yeah.
You're hitting two dice on a 9. That's not great odds. Now, if you upgrade the destroyers become a lot better, but like the only reason I would upgrade my destroyers is because my opponent has fighters. So the fighter argument doesn't really work for basic destroyers.
Yeah.
You might as well build more fighters and match their fighter count.
Yeah, I agree with that.
As opposed to fill out some destroyers. A destroyer feels like a waste of fleet supply at that point.
Yeah.
I'd rather have a carrier and 4 fighters than 4 destroyers.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Well, also like fleet capacity, that's the problem, is that they take up a fleet.
It's taking up a whole fleet supply, and you just can't afford it. So what are the other purposes of a destroyer? Destroyers, for me, have a few weird. Every single one of them is so specific to depending on what's going on in your game.
Yeah.
So there's the fighter deterrent. There's also an argument for if your neighbor is like Extra or someone with graviton laser systems, the tech that lets your PDS kill non-fighter ships before fighters. Destroyers are your new soak, right? Destroyers are a graviton soak. Going up against the Barony flagship, or is it the Lizix one that kills units with non-fighter ships?
Oh,
Lizix.
The Lizix. Yeah.
If you're up against the Lizix fleet, destroyers are good for that as well.
Right.
Of just like, okay, well, you're going to ignore my fighters, so I need some other cheap unit to be able to kill off.
Yeah, even still, though, like, it's not
not
soak that you have to use fleet supply in order to do.
Yeah.
So
I would rather have sustained damage every day of the week. But
Yeah.
if you're low on resources, okay, then I guess that's an argument for destroyers. The last one, and really the more common one, is destroyers move 2, and if you have gravity drive, you can get them to some weird places. Now, they're not taking any ground forces, but for those odd space control objectives that you just need to... I just need one more ship adjacent to Mechatol Rex, and there's an empty asteroid field there. Let me send my destroyer, because that's so non-committal, I can just let it park there, and people might just leave it alone.
Yeah.
And the same goes for what we talked about with Fighter 2. Park destroyers just like on the edges of your perimeter to just be a buffer between you and your opponent.
Honestly, I hate when I start with one, because I'm just like, what am I going to do with this?
Right.
And then I find some silly thing to do with it like that. Like it just serves to block an area, or I use it to trade with somebody. I did want to ask, I'm asking a question in media res in the middle of the show. And I want this in here because I don't actually know this. When Mentak can use destroyers to ambush, right?
Yeah.
So when they do that, do they also do anti-fighter barrage? So is it ambush, anti-fighter barrage?
Yep.
Wow.
It's pretty good, but it's all on 9s.
Yeah,
I would rather have 2 cruisers rolling on 6s for my ambush.
It's weird because it's so much better with the cruisers. But had they taken the cruisers out of ambush, that it would have been like, oh, Mentak is the destroyer faction. You got to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
it's funny too because Mentak are not that far off. I mean, you start with a red. You're really not that far off from getting Destroyer 2. One red skip, and you could just have Destroyer 2.
Maybe that's something to explore. That's something to explore, I think.
It's worth trying. But the only other thing, too, the Destroyers... This is sort of like the Ghost consideration, or there's a couple other factions that would do this, but like Destroyers can help you go establish trade routes.
Yeah.
A destroyer is super non-threatening. I can tell my, hunters across the board, but there's like a wormhole that connects us. I can just be like, hey, hunter, do you mind if I just send this destroyer through the wormhole to park next to you so that you and I can trade?
Right.
Obviously, it's not going to do anything to you because it's just a destroyer.
Yeah.
Honestly, that is like the most valuable use of a destroyer.
Ooh, I agree with that.
It's like, I can get some trade goods out of parking this destroyer way out of the way.
Right.
And if they decide to kill it later, it's like not even a big deal. How many times have you been in a game where you're like, the person's like, I need to move into that space now, and you're like, okay, well, I can't afford to move the destroyer, but just kill it. It's fine. I don't care. Go ahead.
Right.
Yeah, and it doesn't muddy the waters between you two. Like, it doesn't ruin your relationship at all for them to kill a destroyer.
There have been plenty of times that's happened, and it would always come down to like, I don't want to waste the command counter to move that destroyer.
Right.
I have no desire to do that. Just kill it.
And if you had done that with like a cruiser, it would be such a more difficult.
Yeah, I would hate that. I would be so sad to lose that cruiser.
That's the role of destroyers, is almost to not exist in fleets. I mean, there's a couple fleet arguments, but generally my destroyers just run around doing weird other jobs.
Yeah, I honestly, talking about destroyers right now kind of makes me feel like playing a game where I specifically go after Destroyer 2, because there hasn't been a lot of, like, every time I see Destroyer 2, like someone using it, I always forget, like, what, it's 2 on a 6? Like
3 on a 6.
3 on a 6, yeah. See, I just forgot it right there. Isn't that crazy? I just forgot it.
I think my issue is, and maybe it's just our meta of people we've been playing with, I never see people do big enough fighter swarms for me to justify doing
That's true.
I just never see anyone go for it.
It would have been a lot better in TI3 when fighter swarms were more just kind of like obvious. And like,
upgrading destroyers which it wasn't an upgrade, but getting those upgrades was much more difficult in TI3. TI3 also, Hylar 5 Assault Laser, which is like a level 1 tech, upgraded your destroyers hits. Mm-hmm. So like almost every destroyer in TI3 hit on an 8.
Right.
So destroyers were a little bit better by and large,
right?
And to get the upgraded anti-fighter barrage, you just never went for it because it was kind of out of the way. Mm-hmm. Very, very few factions needed that.
And now it's like behind
with it.
Now it's behind Majin, like
which is a firewall.
yeah. There's a Majin wall in between you and it.
So
let's talk about cruisers.
Cruisers are there's a lot to talk about. Actually,
are they your favorite? Are cruisers your favorite? No. Tell me now.
Depends on the faction, but generally, yes.
Yeah, I think they are.
Like, cruisers having ambush is the reason I love Mentak.
Yeah.
That is, like, the number one thing.
It's freaking
So,
cool.
to that end, I love cruisers. But, real quickly, when do you build destroyers? Because we've been asking that question with each of these.
Oh.
And it's pretty obvious, but I want to get one specific thing. So, obviously, if your neighbor is a fighter faction, you should get your destroyers being built early, and you should upgrade those destroyers.
Well, but except for that, we sort of already said that it's not really that worth it. You might as well just throw more fighters in there.
Right. But let's talk about I have one resource left. I have one production capacity left.
Okay, I'm with that.
I will build a destroyer then. Honestly, that is like the only time I build destroyers. It's just like, well, I've got the extra resources. And it should be clear, that's not I have an extra trade good to spend in an extra production capacity. If I had a choice of spending the trade good or not on a destroyer, I would keep the trade good, because that could be worth points later.
Right, and this is also assuming you have the fleet supply to throw a destroyer in, which you maybe haven't planned on that. So.
Right. So if you have enough fleet supply, if you have a high enough production capacity, and you have one resource left, okay, build a destroyer. Or if you ran out of cruisers and you're just trying to get more ships on the table, okay, start building destroyers. But I generally do not consider destroyers very heavily. Just kind of, they're an afterthought. So cruisers, my favorite ship. What are we doing with cruisers? Cruisers are interesting because you can do so much crazy stuff with them. Obviously, when you upgrade them, they have a movement of 3. They have basically the most movement of any ship in the game, except for Muuat War Sons, which is tied. So cruisers can get all over the place. So your goal with a cruiser is to be sneaky and do cheeky little things with them.
Right.
This is why I love cruiser factions that want Cruiser 2, is because those are the factions that do some of the most interesting maneuvers of like, oh, I snuck 2 cruisers and 2 ground forces to this planet you were not expecting me to get to, and I get to take that planet, and now you have to figure out if you're going to turn around and take it back or not.
Right.
And they're not that expensive. I mean, 2 resources per cruiser. I think that's like the best value proposition for a ship. Or not the best, but like the most common that you can afford. Right. The best value proposition is a Dreadnought. Dreadnoughts are amazing value for 4 resources, but you don't always have the 4 resources.
Right.
So cruisers, you can almost always afford a cruiser.
They're also, also Dreadnoughts are slower generally. So it just depends. It depends on what you want. But yeah, cruisers open up some options that I feel like if you're going a different way tech-wise, you never get to until like light wave deflector, basically. It gives you like light wave deflector level, like, whoa, hey, how did he do that? Like, kind of stuff.
Right, because a single cruiser 2 with gravity drive, 4 movement. I mean, that thing is so going anywhere you want, basically.
Right.
So what's the other purpose, though? There's the sneaky stuff, but like not every faction is a sneaky faction, and not everyone is in a position to do weird sneaky maneuvers. So beyond sneaky stuff, I really think of cruisers as like the foot soldiers. They're kind of just like, you should have some cruisers in like every fleet. That's just sort of like, they're going to get hits fairly often. You know, they roll on a 7, so they're what is that, a 40% chance to hit?
Right.
And you can upgrade them to be a 50% chance to hit. And they're just like, they're there to fill out the army.
Right.
You have your carrier, you've got a couple fighters, you've got 2 more fleet supply. Why not 2 cruisers? It's a cheap way to have a good amount of hits on your side.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about regular plain old cruisers, like without upgrading them, because I actually feel like there's kind of a weird thing that happens where most factions now, because of how the tech is spread out, are either going for Dreadnought 2, in which case they might not even want to throw any cruisers into the mix, because it's like, why am I going to, I'm going to upgrade these Dreadnoughts, like I would rather just build more of them. And then in that case, you might just throw an extra one in, just like kind of a destroyer case where it's just like just off the top, you had 2 left over, you spent it on a cruiser. But the other direction is that I feel like most factions that don't go Dreadnought 2 could then potentially, and they don't always do it, but could potentially go Cruiser 2. So I feel like cruisers could be, they're kind of an in-between unit that I could see anyone building, but I could also see people just bypassing them completely.
Right.
It just depends. Like, I feel like fighter, like Nalu, like fighter factions could potentially throw some cruisers in there and be like, okay, cool, I've got these cruisers as well. But I don't know. It just, they're kind of odd to me. I feel like I love cars, fighters, and Dreadnoughts. And everything else I just feel kind of weird about in general.
Right. You know what's funny? I think this is a good argument in favor of what you're talking about, is like Lizix L1Z1X starts with a green and a red, and yet I don't think I've ever gotten Cruiser 2 as the L1Z1X.
Yeah, I mean, why?
And you get yellow. Like most of the time, you're going to get Sarween tools as well. Like you usually, a lot of times you go for just Dreadnought 2, so you're getting blue, yellow, so you have everything you need to get Cruiser 2.
Yeah.
But if I've ever gotten Cruiser 2 as L1, it was to get another upgrade, and then I still wasn't building cruisers.
Well, because if you've gone that way, then you have Dreadnoughts that carry 2, that with gravity drive could do a sneaky cruiser maneuver. So it's kind of makes it redundant at that point.
Right. And you're probably not affording, you're really spending all your money on Dreadnoughts if you can help it.
Honestly, I feel like I would be like, I'm actually coming, or I did not necessarily care for this topic too much when we started going into it. I'm kind of coming around on it, but I feel like there might be a whole discussion in cruisers versus Dreadnoughts.
Yeah.
And what factions because to me, sometimes it feels like the only reason, besides Mentak, if you take Mentak out of the mix, it feels like the only reason a faction goes for cruisers is because they are not in a good enough tech position to go for Dreadnought 2.
I agree. Yeah, you get cruisers and probably Cruiser 2 solely because you can't afford to get the blue stuff.
Yeah, you don't have time.
Get the blue stuff.
Right.
I build cruisers when I do not need more capacity, generally speaking.
Yeah.
And this even, I technically include this for Cruiser 2, because Cruiser 2, I don't think of Cruiser 2 as having capacity. I think of a Cruiser 2 should carry 1 ground force. I don't think I have ever put a fighter on a cruiser.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's no need to fly a cruiser and 1 fighter anywhere. So that capacity is solely dedicated to ground forces in my mind. And so I just don't even think of it as that sort of consideration. So for me, it's like I have the carriers I need. Now it's time to get cruisers.
Right.
If I can't afford Dreadnoughts or whatever. And that's kind of like the only time. Now I say that's the only time, but like that happens a lot. You know, you hopefully get your capacity needs finished pretty quickly, And then for, round 2 and 3, it's like, all right, let's build a bunch of cruisers. Let's just like get that out of the way. Let's be done with that. And then in the late game, when I hopefully have more money, I can start building my dreadnoughts.
Yeah.
I sort of think that's generally my arc, is like, I don't really build that many dreadnoughts until round 4. Just because I probably don't afford it. And I'm like, it's such a slow move. I probably haven't really established a forward space dock yet. So do I really want to build dreadnoughts back at home when I'm not feeling that threatened at home yet? Even though I'm constantly threatened at home because it's me. I don't know. That's just sort of how I think about it. Is I try to get like 5 cruisers on the board before round 4, and then it's like, okay, now it's time to build dreadnoughts.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like we very much differ in that way. I think I go ahead and just start building the dreadnought fleet early because, and my thought will be like, oh, if I build this dreadnought at home, I mean, it's slow, but it's a defensive unit and it's at home. It's going to be useful for that mid game when people start making weird plays.
To argue in favor of you, that is certainly my downfall. Is oftentimes I lose because my home wasn't defended well enough, or like my slice wasn't filled out enough with stuff, with defensive units. So, I'm just a scrappier player, so I want those cruisers to be able to get everywhere I need them to get.
Yeah.
Let's dig into these dreadnoughts, though. Let's talk about Hunter's favorite unit.
I don't know. That's not my favorite unit.
Well, cruisers were supposed to be mine. What's your favorite unit?
PDS.
Well, get out of my butt.
I like PDS, though. What PDS are we doing? Is great. Dreadnoughts, D-Boys.
It's D-Boys. What are we doing with D-Boys? Dreadnoughts are weird, I think, because they have 2 opposing but incredibly important uses. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like your Dreadnought is what makes your fleet feel like it earned the title fleet.
Yeah.
A cruiser... like 2 cruisers and a carrier doesn't feel like a fleet. It feels like a little squadron.
Right.
But like as soon as a dreadnought is involved, it's like, my fleets.
Right.
They're at the ready.
Right.
So Hunter, you just talked about defensive. Tell me more about like your defensive dreadnoughts. What's going on there?
Oh, so sometimes like if I'm not a Dreadnought 2 faction or like a blue tech faction even, I like to think of dreadnoughts like this. Let's say I have a forward space dock and I just feel threatened. Sometimes you just throw a dreadnought down as a defensive precaution. It's not necessarily with the intention of like, oh, this dreadnought is gonna push out or whatever. I think of like when I play extra, I feel like I end up building, like even before I build the flagship, I will just throw a dreadnought down on that forward space dock right next to Mechatol. You know that one. You know the one.
You know the one.
And I always feel like, or like when I play Arborek, I always like the idea of taking a planet, throwing those infantry down there and building some defensive dreadnoughts. Just because I don't know, they're just all in one, they hit, they've got a little bit of capacity and they take hits. Like they're all in one.
It's accepting that like it doesn't move fast, so you're not really accomplishing objectives with it, except for it's like I just accomplished the objective, I have it now, and I just need to keep it for the round. So boom, Dreadnought. So obviously the other use is you get Dreadnought 2 and suddenly you've got these mobile little things, because it's so funny to think about like, oh, Dreadnought 2s have a movement of 2, but like more often than not you think of Dreadnought 2s as having a movement of 3 because you had to get Gravity Drive to get Dreadnought 2. That's basically a requirement. You rarely skip Gravity Drive to get Dreadnought 2. You generally have Dreadnoughts with a movement of 3, one Dreadnought with a movement of 3. So you're trying to do weird stuff with it. So like you build it at home and then it's suddenly at the front lines. And it's bringing a lot of power and it's, catching up to the carrier that's been moving out every round, taking systems after systems and getting towards the edge of your perimeter. Now the Dreadnought jumps into the fray, and now it's suddenly a fleet. It was just your expanding force, and now it is a fleet. And it becomes your main offensive unit, and so I to a certain extent I agree with like kind of building them all game so that while they're slow, they're filtering out to the edges. But if you're a Dreadnought 2 race, there is a pretty good argument of waiting to build all of them and then building them and sending them out.
How many factions would we classify as Dreadnought 2 factions at this point?
Exactly.
It's so many. Like it's quite a lot.
I think blue yellow was our we had the most factions in our tech skips episode or whatever, our tech paths episode that were blue yellow factions.
Right.
I don't remember the number, but it is quite a lot. So, you know, the Dreadnought is your main fighting force. The sustained damage can become ridiculously good with Dreadnought 2 because it can't be direct hit. So that just completely blows the economy of hits in the game out of the water. I mean, Dreadnought 2 breaks the game basically because it makes every other unit with sustained damage, it makes those units worse. That's how good Dreadnought 2 is. So you have to think of it as your main offensive unit. With every build, in my mind, you're trying to build a Dreadnought.
Right.
Early game, sometimes you can't afford it. Middle game, sometimes you don't have the capacity or whatever. But like with every build action, my goal is to get at least one Dreadnought down.
Yeah. Always.
If it's 5 resources and it's mid to late game, 4 of those resources are a Dreadnought, and then 2 are a ground force or something, like 2 ground forces to just then also reinforce the planet. That's like the perfect defensive maneuver, Hunter, you were just talking about. If you have Sarween tools and 4 resources, Dreadnought, 2 ground forces, boom.
Yeah.
That planet is defended. It's fine now.
Right.
And alternatively for fleets, it's like Dreadnought and 2 fighters. That's gonna go do some.
That's a good start. Yeah.
Yeah. It's also sort of the opposite of the fighter argument. If you're rich, if you're Barony, Aletnev, that's why Barony gets such big fleets, right? I mean, obviously, non-Euclidean shielding is good, but like Barony typically has more money than they have production capacity.
Yeah.
Which is the exact situation in which you would build Dreadnoughts. I have 2 production capacity, and I can build. You know, I have lots and lots of money. Looks like I'm building 2 Dreadnoughts.
Right, because one of the things that I like about this is a really fundamental thing that I like about Twilight Imperium is that your resource management, like that your planets, there's no reason not to spend them every round. You need to spend them every round.
Yes.
Basically, there's absolutely no reason not to. They do not roll over. They all refresh and come back. So, and I love that. So that means you do need to build. And so, I think a lot of times that relationship between, that's why it's hard. Like, I don't know if some people out of this episode, they wanted us to like propose, like, you should build exactly 2 Dreadnoughts and like 3 fighters and a carrier.
It doesn't work that way.
Right. Because your relationship between the resources that you have available to you and the production capacity that you have is way more important in deciding your fleet composition. And you can't determine that beforehand. You have no way of knowing what that's going to be at any given round.
Right. Because sometimes you start with Barrag Lure to 4 adjacent to your home system, which means round 2, you've got lots of money. You have that's the perfect situation of like, oh, it looks like I'm building a bunch of Dreadnoughts round 2 because I got Barrag Lure to 4 next to me. But sometimes your round 1 got you 2 more resources. Well, I guess it's a cruiser round 2.
Right.
So you can't talk about fleet composition and think you're going to get any sort of build order really ever. I mean, because it is so circumstantial to what is going on the board and what's going on with your game.
And then
what
like
your neighbors are doing, what do you need to fight against?
Right. And then like your tech on top of that, like on top of all of those other things, there's the tech that you have available to you and the tech path that is most optimal for you. I don't know. Are we going to talk about War Sons now?
Very briefly. Yeah. Oh boy. War Sons. Here's our 2 considerations for War Sons. You either get them early or you don't get them. That's it. You're either Muuat or someone who has a red and yellow in their pie slice, a red and yellow skip, and you're able to just jump straight to War Sons very fast. Or you should take War Sons out of your mind. Forget that they exist because you won't. Even if you got the tech and then could afford a War Sun, the likelihood that it will make a substantial difference on your board in time in a 10-point game is very, very slim. You will probably get 1 action out of your War Sun in most games. And so it's like, okay, maybe sometimes that's a game-winning action. But generally speaking, you could do... Those 12 resources could be spent on other stuff. 12 resources is 3 Dreadnoughts. If you've got the fleet supply, I would rather have 3 Dreadnoughts every day of the week.
Yeah, well, and also I put it into the battle calculator, and 2 Dreadnoughts will be a single War Sun if there's no fighters involved. So there's that, you math heads. Yeah.
So
I wanted to say something, though. Here's a time that you might build War Suns. If you're in the Space Cats Peace Turtles tournament and you have taken the dangerous Diplo slice, you might build War Suns.
The slice of the Gashly.
Oh, yeah, sorry, slice of the Gashly. Yeah, I'm a dingus. Slice of the Gashly.
Yeah. That's why that slice is designed that way. I really hope we see some War Sun play.
I think we will.
People have been saying that Muuat is performing Muuat is a viable faction on that tournament map.
What? How ironic.
Isn't that beautiful?
That we made that happen.
So I don't want to talk about War Suns anymore because it's just, they're bunker busters. Sure, we can talk about their purposes. Like, it's 3 bombardment on a 3. You are basically guaranteed to have plasma scoring. So really, it's 4 dice on a 3. So like, you're gonna kill some stuff, and you don't have to worry about PDS. So if you have decent enough access to War Suns and your neighbor is Xcha, all right. Maybe you should aim for War Suns. But the problem with War Suns is you have to think about aiming for War Suns from the beginning of the game. If you're actually going to be able to get it, it has to be round 1. I'm trying to get War Suns.
Yeah, I think the planetary shield thing, getting past planetary, what is it called? It just says disable. Yeah. So just
it disables planetary.
Yeah.
Shield.
So the fact that's the only thing that I'm jealous of War Suns about, and that's the only thing that balance wise I get annoyed with, the fact that War Suns are so rarely used, because I feel like, to go back to my favorite unit, it has made PDS overvalued, because now you can pretty reliably just plop some PDS down and be like, there's bombardment is not happening here. Basically. At all.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. It's because of Dreadnought too. All of it comes back to, you can't afford to get War Suns because none of the direct hits are getting used on people's Dreadnoughts. So everyone has a direct hit in their hand. That's how I think about, if I have a War Sun on the board, all I think about is like, everyone has a direct hit. Probably.
Yeah.
So I can't attack anybody with this War Sun because I can't sustain damage on it. The sustain damage is useless for me.
Right.
So it just becomes this it constantly feels terrifying to use a War Sun, where it should be the opposite. It should be, that's what it was in TI3. Boom, Hunter got War Suns on the table. Enemy number 1, everyone freak out. Hunter has War Suns. We're all doomed. Like, it's here it comes. And in TI3 or TI4, it's like, I have War Suns. Cool, we can all deal with that. We're all prepared to deal with that.
Or it's just too late. The timing isn't scary. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember I used to, in TI3, my goal was always to play, I always wanted to play Hakan, and I always wanted to eventually get War Suns. Yeah. And it was just so great. I don't know, like, what happened there? That's gone. So we're going to talk about every single flagship now?
Yeah, let's do an episode where we talk about every flagship. I don't know. Hunter, do you want to try this fun thing where we like...
Yeah, I've got my dice. I'm getting
them up against each other. No, we did an episode about flagships. It is episode 29, Flagship Tier List. And if you want to hear our thoughts on every specific flagship, go listen to episode 29. We cannot break down every flagship here, but we did want to give one consideration for flagships, which is... Hunter... No! While Hunter's doing that, I'm going to talk about 2 on a 5. There are flagships in this game that... So every flagship is either 2 on a 5, 2 on a 7, or 2 on a 9. That's the dice that they roll. Similar to how a War Sun is 3 on a 3. You roll 3 dice. If you hit a 3 or higher, you get a hit. The flagships that are 2 on a 5, those are flagships that I consider just like ships that I would build. Because they're good ships. They're 2 Dreadnought. If you're lower on fleet supply, but you need 2 Dreadnoughts, boom, flagship, put it down.
Yep.
The ones that are 2 on a 9, you need to really consider what the ability of that ship is before you just willy-nilly build it. You do not need... Every faction does not need their flagship. And even more to that end, someone killing your flagship is worth a point, so that flagship needs to be able to defend itself if it's going to be on the board at all.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why the 2 on a 5 is the only one where it's just like, it's 2 on a 5, I'm going to build that.
Right.
2 on a 7 is obviously in the middle there. And
right.
You know,
it better have a good effect, basically.
Right. Better have a good effect, and it better be defended. And the ones that are 2 on a 9, it like has to be with a good fleet. It absolutely has to be.
Or the huge van.
Or it's just the huge van. That's the only difference. The huge van is the Van Hog. It's the Yin flagship. And if you have that, well, then whatever. You're playing a completely different game.
You're playing your own game. That's just for you.
It's just gun on the table. So for anything else Flagship specific, you're gonna have to just listen to that episode because we talk about that a lot of whether or not we think flagships are worth building or not. Let's move on, Hunter. We've talked about every ship. We're not gonna talk about PDS. We're not gonna talk about ground forces because they are not a part of fleets unless you're Necro. But even then, I don't want to get into that really.
Right.
Let's talk about different factions though that have some extra considerations to be thought of. First one, and we've talked about this a bunch, is the Mentak coalition. Right. Mentak think about fleets completely differently, and there's two reasons for that. One, you have ambush, so you want a bunch of cruisers, right? You want to have all cruisers. That would be great. But also because ambush only lets you use 2 of those cruisers per pre-fire shots, it is sort of a waste to have more than 2 cruisers in a single fleet.
Right.
It is actually better to just like 1 carrier, 1 dreadnought, 2 cruisers, and then your other fleet is 1 carrier, 2 cruisers, 1 destroyer, or whatever. Like, you want to have all of your cruisers split up amongst all of your fleets so that you aren't wasting those pre-fire shots. Now, if it's like, well, no, I just have to go completely crash into this Barony fleet, and I need to bring my flagship, and I need to bring all of my cruisers because I just need to kill the fleet, okay, that's fine. That's a completely different thing. But generally speaking, every Mentak fleet should have 2 cruisers in it.
Yeah.
Because those pre-fires are what are winning you the fights in almost every situation.
Right. They're just so cool. It's just such a cool ability.
It's such a cool ability, and honestly, it's like I don't know how often I build dreadnoughts. This is one of those things what we were talking about where you don't have time to get Dreadnought 2 with Mentak, and because your cruisers are so good, it's almost just like, why waste the money on a Dreadnought?
I agree.
It's going to be too slow. You're moving too fast because you're almost definitely getting Cruiser 2, and you're going all over the place. So you might as well not even build the Dreadnoughts unless there's like 1 defensive one at home, that kind of thing.
I mean,
beyond that,
do it using the battle calculator. 2 Mentak regular cruisers unupgraded are more effective than a single Dreadnought. So, and they cost the same amount of resources. It's just that the Mentak are, and I don't mean a lot better, but a little bit better, significantly better.
Better odds, right?
Yeah.
So who else? L1Z1X has. So we talked about. It's weird that we never really think about cruisers with L1Z1X,
right?
Because their dreadnoughts are so good. But I think we need to break down a little bit more why the L1Z1X dreadnoughts are so good. And
capacity 2.
Beyond,
that's it.
It's capacity 2. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what does that do? I mean, that makes it to where in a lot of instances, especially early game, you do not need as many carriers. Like we said before, you should always have 2 carriers. Well, in the early game, one of your dreadnoughts serves as a carrier. You don't need to build the second carrier if you don't want to. You can get away with it. I'm not saying it's an amazing idea to just not build the other carrier, but you can easily get away with it if you want to save yourself 3 resources and build something else.
Honestly, I think of L1 and Barony of both being the factions that build, like, that will have fleets where the composition is just dreadnoughts and only dreadnoughts. And I think with L1, it's that, if you have fleet supply of 3, which is kind of low, especially like for the late game. That's still 3 dreadnoughts is 6 capacity. That could be 3 dreadnoughts with 6 fighters, which that's actually a lot of soak. Like that's a pretty decent fleet.
Right. Well, it's the 6 dreadnoughts are also sustained damage. I mean, that is a ton of hits.
That's a ton of hits. Right.
That's 9 hits before you lose a
and if they're upgraded, which likely you went for that, then they don't take direct hit. So that's so much soak.
That's an insanely defensive fleet. And to the same end, Barony, you're getting it because you can get non-Euclidean shielding, and it eliminates. So L1Z1X eliminates your need for carriers. Barony eliminates your need for fighters.
Yeah, I mean, and pretty much carriers too.
By extension, carrier. You do not need carriers to break. So the only reason you're bringing carriers is because you need more ground forces to invade the planet.
Which is always the Achilles heel of Barony. If you're ever scared of Barony, just notice they never have enough ground forces. That is the way that they are balanced in that way.
Right. Because generally speaking, Barony doesn't have War Suns, and if their flagship isn't coming, then PDS do matter. Now, if their flagship comes in, okay, that's a whole other problem, and that's why their flagship is so good. But if they don't have that flagship that eliminates planetary shield, they have to bring enough ground forces, which means they had to bring a carrier that they really didn't want to have to build and bring.
Right.
Because they would have much rather done it with all dreadnoughts. So a single PDS and like 2 ground forces on every planet, or on a bunch of your planets, you can defend against the Barony, generally speaking. But that's still what Barony's trying to build, is these huge fleets that they just soak so many hits with non-Euclidean shielding and Duranium armor. If you get that combo, it cannot be overstated how good that combo is. Some people try to say it's like not worth it for the amount of time it takes to get there, but I don't know, man. Every time I have a neighbor that's a Barony and they have that combo, they are untouchable from that point forward. Every fleet is like, you run the battle calculator and it's like they never lose. They just never lose a single battle.
Right.
So as long as you are a Barony player that knows how to use that and takes the right stuff, then you're going to do just fine. Let's talk about Hunter. I know this is going to be a little bit triggering for you, but do you want to talk about Muuat for a moment?
I mean, we've already, come on. Do we have to?
So the difference here is we didn't want to build War Suns at all. We said from the get-go, you either get them early or you don't get them. And even then, it's really scary to use them. So with Muuat starting with a War Sun, we said this in the Muuat episode, but all your eggs are in a basket, and you can't afford to lose that basket. You can't lose your War Sun.
Right.
So instead of having this big, scary ship as Muuat, you have this big liability that you have to deal with. And your fleets need to support that. So when we're talking about fleet composition, lots and lots of fighters. And if they have graviton, destroyers. Get lots of destroyers out there. That's like when destroyers can become useful. It's like, I cannot lose my War Sun, and I have to soak some graviton hits. So it becomes, Muuat War Sun is like a super carrier, where it's like, I have to protect that War Sun at all costs.
Right.
A normal fleet is there to protect a carrier. A Muuat fleet is all about protecting the War Sun. And everything you build should be in service of defending that War Sun.
Yeah, that's about it. That's about all I got.
Let's move on from the scary territory of Muuat.
Yeah, Sardakk.
Sardakk's an interesting one. We've talked about this before, but what's Sardakk's deal?
So their advantage scales in that the cheaper, like not as good units like destroyers, fighters, especially fighters. Actually, I think honestly, fighters might be the best way to go for Sardakk. Because of the +1 across the board, that +1 is not made equal. It makes very little difference if you have a War Sun that's +1, but fighters +1 is great, is really good, and they start with that.
It's a statistical advantage. You increase your odds way more by having 5 fighters with their bonuses, with your Sardakk bonus, than 1 War Sun with your Sardakk bonus.
Right.
So it shapes your fleet composition and it shapes your game to, I want more carriers because I'm not Nalu. I can't have fighters that just go all over the place quite as easily. Fighter 2 is still a good idea, Sardakk, don't get me wrong, but a fighter costing a fleet supply is always like a tricky problem to deal with. I hate having to do that. When I have fighter 2 and I'm not Nalu, I still think of all of my fighters requiring a carrier. Like I do not want to waste a fleet supply on a fighter. But a good Sardakk fleet is 2 carriers, 2 ground forces, and all the rest, 6 fighters. That is a sizable enough force. You do not need more Dreadnoughts. You don't need anything else. That's only 2 fleet supply. You could throw in a destroyer if you ended up with destroyer 2 as Sardakk, or you could throw in a cruiser, but you do not need that. I mean, honestly, like with Sardakk, I would rather build all carriers and fighters and ground forces, and that's it all game, and I would be a pretty happy Sardakk.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Because again, if you're doing the blue-green tech path, you have upgraded carriers that move to, you have upgraded fighters, and you have upgraded ground forces. And those are the only units you build, and they're the only ones upgraded. That's like no wasted money, right?
Right.
Everything that you're using is as upgraded as it can possibly be, and it's doing as much as possible. Like you cannot get better than that.
I want to play Sardakk now.
It's weird.
They could just be, if it weren't for all the economic disadvantages, they would just be like a beefy soul.
So
like
good, yeah. Let's talk about Nalu. Nalu is so interesting to me because, Hunter, how many times have you seen someone build cruisers as Nalu?
I don't know why you would, really. I don't really get what the point would be. Just because their fighters end up
being a cruiser.
Yeah, they end up
they're
hitting
a base. They end up being a basic cruiser, and your Nalu is one of those factions that has a really specific tech path. They really want to gun down green, so you don't necessarily have time to get out of your way and get Cruiser 2.
Right. Not that you're far from it. You're close. You start with
You're really close. Yeah. But you need Fighter 2 and you need Neuroglaive before you do that. So your fighters end up just replacing cruisers completely.
Yeah.
And so it's cheaper. So with Nalu, you kind of need to focus on getting good production capacity. You have to get ahead of that. And that needs to be like your number one consideration with fleet compositions is like, I need to be able to build enough fighters because the fighters are going to do the most work.
Yeah. God, Nalu fighters are so nuts. I want to play Nalu too now. I would like to play some of this game that we talk about. I'm actually realizing that I would like to do that.
It's been a while for you, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been a minute. It's been a minute for me.
Well, you know what? As of the airing of this episode, you're gonna be here in a week, boy.
Oh, are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'll be there in less than a week from when this comes out. That's crazy.
We have to figure out how you're getting.
Oh hey, yeah, I was gonna ask you. I'm coming into Kansas City. I need you to pick me up.
Well, Hunter, I feel like that this conversation could have happened sooner than a week before you get here, but
well, you got to come get me, otherwise I'm not. Otherwise, I'll just live in Kansas City.
I'll see if I can come get you. Speaking of coming and getting you, the Yin Brotherhood have this interesting Cruiser 2 situation that I wanted to talk about. Beyond this, I don't think Yin have any other special fleet composition things.
Sure.
But there is this interesting Cruiser 2 argument of like a single Yin ground force can do some work.
Yeah.
Like very few other units can. And so if you're targeting the right planet and you have Cruiser 2, you can send a single Cruiser 2 and go take a planet.
Yeah.
And reinforce it in like a major way. So I wanted to throw that out there. It can be a little bit of like a red herring because it's not like the cruisers by themselves are great for Yin. They're fine. They're a typical cruiser, but like I don't want to only have cruisers as a Yin army. I do need more than that. I need carriers. I need dreadnoughts. I need all the other stuff. But there's just this argument of like, well, if you do get Cruiser 2, you can every once in a while do a funny, weird little maneuver.
Right.
And it seemed worth pointing that out. But beyond that, I really wouldn't divert my entire Yin fleet strategy around Cruiser 2. That's just like it's an extra ability that you have. It is not something you center your game around.
Right.
Anytime I tried to do that, anytime I tried to just like Cruiser 2 and I'm going to build a ton of cruisers and we're going to send them everywhere, it never worked out because the problem is cruisers don't defend themselves well enough.
Mm-hmm.
So you cannot use cruisers as a primary invading force. You cannot go up against the fleet with 4 cruisers and 4 ground forces and expect to take the planet. You will probably lose all those cruisers because for every cruiser you lose, you're losing a ground force as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem. So it is not a main defending force, and it just can't be. It is only I have Cruiser 2, and just so happens you left that planet lightly defended. I'm gonna send 1 or 2 Cruiser 2s over there and nab it real quick.
It's just some funky mat stuff. That's what it is. It's just some. You're just bringing up some of your funky mat stuff.
Well, tell me about the last important one, and that's Soul.
I don't think this one is important because I actually think that Soul doesn't even need fleets. Is what we're starting to. I feel like we're getting a lot of stories from people over the last year of people just being like, "Yeah, I didn't even have any ships.
Right,
like,
I just took planets and then reinforced them with
orbital drop. But definitely, if you're going to build ships with Soul." The blue, green, and like they're just great carrier. They're great cars. They got good cars.
Yeah.
They're built Ford tough, and and I say that because they have sustained damage when you upgrade
right.
them.
I get it.
And with their capacity, some fighter swarms. I've actually never even done that with Soul though. Like I'm so distracted by just loading.
Need it.
Yeah, by just moving dudes around. And like having a great early game and then just kind of going from there into the mid and late game that I still have never really done like a fighter heavy Soul. I've never done it.
But that is the argument. It is the argument of it's similar to our Sardakk thing, right? Is a Soul could exist with carriers, fighters, and ground forces and nothing else. And your flagship, right? Because a flagship and 1 carrier, if it's a carrier 2, that's 20 capacity.
Yeah.
For 2 ships,
so
2
nuts.
fleet supply.
So
2
nuts.
fleet supply is 20 capacity. So as long as you can get your production capacity to keep up and have lots of fighters, I mean, that's when your fighter twos, it is just filling up the rest of that fleet.
Dude, and like the craziest part is they don't even need that. Like that is like a leftover advantage that I don't even see people take advantage of because it's just so good already.
Yeah, it's so win more. But yeah, if you upgrade those carriers, 8 capacity per carrier, 3 ground forces to deal with most invasions, and that means 5 fighters with every carrier, right? Mm-hmm. So 5 hits that you can soak. You're overwhelming everybody. You can throw a Dreadnought in there, sure. I don't care. It's not doing. It's the fighters are doing all the work. So it's insane to me that Sol can get away with that. So we've brought this up numerous times and we've repeated ourselves saying this, but all of this is dependent on the money you have available, the production capacity you have available, and the timing of what's going on the map, like what you're surrounded by. Mm-hmm. So there's no perfect fleet composition. There's no ideally, you have exactly this. It's just a combination of what you can afford and where you can put it.
Right. Yeah. That's like I would say that's the thesis.
And that's to a certain end, like to the warfare side of TI, that is what the whole game is. That's why this episode can't be about like what is the perfect fleet, because like that's what the strategy of every individual game of Twilight Imperium is figuring out how best to use your resources to get enough fleet to defend you.
Right.
And so there's no one answer because that's what every single game of TI is about.
Right.
And it changes between every game. But to offer up just one idea of what I don't know if Hunter considers this, but I have what I would consider sort of a baseline good fleet, and everything else would be an adjustment to this. It would be considering, well, my X is more powerful, my cruisers are more powerful, so I want to swap this out or whatever.
Right.
But if I start the game with 3 fleet supply, I would be thrilled to have 1 Dreadnought, 1 cruiser, 1 carrier, which means I have 5 capacity, so I want 3 ground forces and 2 fighters. To me, that's like an ideal fleet.
Yeah.
You soak 2 hits. You soak 3 hits before you lose any important units with a sustained damage and 2 fighters. So you can afford to lose 3 hits. Your cruisers and dreads are hitting well. And you've got enough ground forces to take basically any planet in the early to mid game.
Sure.
So if you're looking for a baseline, that's what I would call it. Any fleet that starts with that, I don't know if there are any with 1 dread, 3 cruiser, or 1 cruiser, 1 carrier, 3 ground forces, 2 fighters, but that would be like an ideal starting fleet to me.
Well, I mean, no
2 C4I, whatever.
Right.
But what I mean by starting fleet is, I mean
in a single fleet. In a single fleet.
In a single fleet, that would be great.
Yeah.
So whatever. There's that little nugget for you to take and do with what you will. But that's the closest you're going to get from me to like a perfectly optimal fleet. I don't think that exists. An optimal fleet doesn't exist. An optimal purchase is what exists.
Yes.
That's the difference. Optimally buying your fleets is more important than optimally having your units distributed amongst your fleets in a certain way. That's just, I don't know, figure that out and you'll be fine. But it's the building that is actually more important.
Right. All right, well, are we ready to... Oh, actually, I wanted to talk about one thing before in the episode proper before we go to the errata. This doesn't have anything to do with what we've been talking about, but I've been noticing that we've been talking about a lot of good, cool factions that are fun to play. But I was looking at what factions should Space Cats Peace Turtles play in the 2018 Holiday Spectacular poll, which is the Steve Martin thing.
Yeah.
And it feels like people just want us to play the goofball, all the goofball races.
I mean, the first time we did a stream, all we got were the worst factions. That's how it goes.
That's true.
Yeah, let's throw this out there. Since this is a Galactic Council episode, for all you Steve Martin fan club members, there was a poll. I'll repost it in the Discord and I'll repost it on Patreon. But it's currently the leaders are Ghost of Creus
and
Necrovirus, and then Clanosaur, Arborek, Lizix, and technically Sardakk, although there's actually a tie. Like it's actually 7 factions are like have enough votes to be in the final game.
Right.
So we do need more votes for that. Have we announced the Holiday Spectacular?
No,
it's going to be? Let's do that.
I was thinking we should do that.
Yeah. So last year we did a holiday spectacular. We did a stream with all of our friends who come in town. It's for us, it's Christmas time, and everybody comes back to Arkansas, and we're going to play a game. We're going to stream it. This year, I think we're going to stream 2 games back to back. The first game being kind of your standard game where we're just going to we want to play TI. We haven't all played TI together in like a year. So we're going to do that. But then after that, we're going to do a more typical Space Cats Peace Turtles stream. And if you've never joined a Space Cats Peace Turtles stream, I highly encourage you to come to this holiday spectacular because we get real stupid. And by that, I mean there's lots of dumb bonus rules thrown in.
Right.
And
it's
just absolute madness. And it's super, super fun, and we try to engage with everybody who's watching the whole time. And I would love to see this year's holiday spectacular get like some. It's December 23rd, so it's 2 days before Christmas. It's on a Sunday. Hopefully, you have the day off, and it would be just super awesome if you came and joined us.
And just
for
like
that game.
just like got down by the fire, just like on the heath and watched us play TI.
The heath, the hearth.
The hearth, yeah, the hearth. Did I say the heath?
You said the heath.
Oh,
the Heathcliff.
Yeah. What were we gonna do the role play stream for holiday time? Is that gonna happen?
I think we talked about that a long time ago, but I don't know. Maybe that's what the first game will be. It'll be a standard game, but also a little bit more role.
My general thing was I wanted a goofy game and then a really like a serious game, a goofy game and a serious game. That's what I want to promise the people.
So yeah, we'll definitely have that, and you can expect the first game to be the serious one, and the second game is going to be really insane. We don't have the times for that exactly yet, but I would assume probably like a 10 or 11 central time start for the whole stream, which means the second game is probably like 4 o'clock or something like that.
Right.
If anything too, I don't know if we'll be able to nail down an exact start time for the second game unless we do. Last year we literally put a time limit on the first rounds of games and just stopped them when time ran out.
Right.
So we'll probably do something similar to that this year. Anyways, please come join us for that stream. It is going to be so fun. And as you can hear, the factions are going to be insane. I mean, it's going to be a wacky, wacky game.
It's going to be a goofball game.
It's going to be on a dumb map, too. I'll say that much. We're supposed to get a really, really weird map made for us that's like not even a standard structure map. It will not be a, the like hexagon shape. It's gonna be a really stupid game. So please join us for that, December 23rd. But let's jump into the errata.
Yeah. All right, let's do this errata because I want to go to bed. Welcome to Hunter's sleepy time. Just before I'm laying in bed, I'm in bed right now, and I have the microphone pulled up, and I'm laying my head on my pillow, and I'm about to pass out. And right before I pass out, I read this great submission from Acquisition Red Pro.
Equiton Red.
Acquisition.
Look how tired you are. And we should note this is for last week's 4-player episode. So talking about the 4-player game. Go ahead.
Right. So pro. This is as opposed to a con. Pro. A 4-player game is a good way to teach new players the rules. Shorter playtime, abundance of resources, and big slices make learning each rule/concept easier, and the players leave feeling like they played a part, since VPs are easier to score.
Now, before Hunter gets into his opinion on this, let's give the counterpoint from Ronald SF, which is, for new players, a spacious 4-player map gives the idea that there is less conflict in a TI game than there usually is. I had one player I was introducing the game to come away with that impression, and I think this works 2 ways, because I somewhat agree with Ronald SF. I agree with Equiton Red, too, that it can be good for new players, but there's 2 problems with using a 4-player game as a teaching game. The first is, if they are going to in the future be playing 6-player games, they get a lot of bad they get a lot of bad ideas and bad habits from the 4-player game. But even more so than that, what I see with new players is if you play a 4-player game where it's like super casual and just like, oh yeah, we're just expanding and grabbing stuff, for a lot of people, that is not invigorating. A lot of people come into TI very, with a lot of trepidations and a lot of concerns, and they've heard it's this super, super long game. And if you fill that long game with not a lot of action happening,
right,
it can turn them sour on the whole idea of the game. I personally would rather have a 6-player game where they were probably too aggressive early and threw their game out the window and didn't have a chance at winning, but they had a good time because they clashed their fleets up against other people's. I would rather them come away with those first impressions than I got second place. I don't feel like I did anything all game. I don't feel like I made any conscious decisions all game. It feels like everything was handed to me.
Yeah, I agree with everything Matt said. I think Aquaton Red makes, like, the point that you're making is valid, that they will learn the rules that way, but I don't think they'll learn to love the game that way. Or will they learn to, like, I don't know, they'll learn the rules in, like, kind of a cold, dead way, but they won't really learn how to, like, apply any of that in a meaningful way. It will just be like, just the equivalent of, it's like if you have 3 people that are not willing to read the rule book or watch the video or listen to this show at all, like they're not willing to listen to the learn to learn or anything like that, then maybe a 4-player game would be a good overview.
Yeah.
But I also feel like they just wouldn't come away with a good idea of what the game is about or what makes it special.
Yeah. TI is one of these games where, like, you kind of have to do your homework to play it. You really do.
Just jump in. Just jump into the water's fine. Jump on in.
Right.
Hey, we're all here in the deep end, okay? We're all here swimming around. It's okay. We're good. Just jump in. Come on in.
Just jump on in.
Well, water's fine. Come on in.
Let's move on. Phytophthorine. That's a long one. I would like to reiterate that map alterations really help a 4-player game. I have played a few due to player number problems, but using an altered map really helps with early rounds of a 4-player game. The skinny map is my favorite. We tried to say this as a disclaimer at the beginning of the episode, but yeah, we did not talk at all about the things you can change about a 4-player game that make it a much better experience. And I'm a huge proponent of those things. And I probably should have talked about them, but I think I want to do an episode in the future that really dives into more of this stuff of, like, what can you do with a 4-player game to shake things up and make it better.
Mm-hmm.
But this is definitely one of the things that the skinny map is basically taking in a 4-player game. You know, the planets are positioned in such a way where there's 2 edges with, like, a straight line of 4 systems on either side. If you just eliminate those system tiles, you have a much more competitive map with way less resources available, and a lot of the problems of 4 players goes away. Now, this doesn't get rid of the dual strategy card problem. And I saw one person recommend, why not just have everybody only draw 1 strategy card? That's also terrifying to me. I mean, only having 4 strategy cards drawn
too much gets left out, I feel like.
Yeah, it's a lot left out. You're actually doing significantly less than you should be. It's almost the opposite problem at that point. Is like now I can't do anything. I can't afford to do anything.
I do feel like we are being a little bit arbitrary though, because I don't know. Like, I mean, I've never tried it. Like, I don't know. It might be fun.
The only time I've tried it, and it wasn't really trying it, is when we played a 5-player game and 1 player got eliminated, and we were forced to play with 4 strategy cards the whole game. And that game felt very like, oh my gosh, I am so starved for everything. I mean, it made, like, leadership has to become, like, a top pick, because if you, like, it's so easy for it to not get picked. Like, something's going to get left out. If there's only 4 things getting picked, some vital strategy card is going to get left out. And that's interesting and that's crazy, but boy, is it also hard.
It might be fun. It might be fun to try, though.
It could be fun. But yeah, there's other ideas of what you can do for 4-player games, and I think we'll talk about that more in the future. But you can always use 2 warp zones. So warp zone is what people do for 5-player games. You can always just use 2 of those.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Stronkowski has a point. I am surprised the prevalence of PDS due to construction every round wasn't mentioned with all the talk about all of the strategy cards being out. I think there's something. There's just too much of everything. I feel like we didn't make a specific point to say PDS, but it's obnoxious.
I mean, it's not only does everyone have their stuff that they need, but more people have PDS than normal, which means everything is more defensible, which means it's even harder to get into other people's stuff.
Right, but then so also people have bigger fleets than they would have normal too, because they have more resources.
Right. I don't know. It just it definitely changes the whole idea of, like, what does conflict mean.
Everybody just has more stuff of all the things. Everybody has more PDS, but also everybody has more fleets. I don't know which way it all goes.
There were some reactions to Stromkowski. I think some people said they didn't feel like, because there's so many secondaries to do, you see less people doing the secondary of construction, which I agree with.
Also, the way construction is set up, if people are doing it right, it's really inconvenient for people to do the secondary. So, it doesn't matter if it's getting taken every time. If everybody's doing it as their first action of their turn, then
only one person got it. Yeah.
Yeah, or maybe two. I guess no.
Right. Honestly, I see more space docks in a 4-player game.
Yeah.
That's the difference. Is everyone's getting space docks out on the board faster and building on the fronts, and you need them more too. Anyways, I mean it's a self-balancing thing, right? You're further away from everybody, so you need a forward dock even more. So I think all in all, it actually does kind of just balance itself out. It's not like that big of a deal to have more PDS because, like you said, more ships, more forward space docks, more resources,
more everything.
The 9 of Spades says, did Hunter voice Alpha 5 in the original Power Rangers movie show from the 90s? Hunter, do you want to comment on your Alpha 5? This is in response to your lovely voice for last week's Play of the Week.
Oh, yeah. So I guess it sounded a little bit like Alpha 5. Well, I will let you know that I was but 5-year-old myself when the show came out. And so what I'm saying is, yes, I was Alpha 5. I was a child star. If it's not obvious to my general attitude. And no, actually, I do want to say, I think my personality could be described as failed child star. I think that actually might be my disposition.
I love that someone pointed this out because, Hunter, you have a kind of odd amount of experience with Power Rangers.
I love Power Rangers. So when I was a kid, what happened was when I was a kid, everybody loved Power Rangers.
There was a meteor, and
everybody liked Power Rangers when they were a kid. But then most kids grew out of it, and I just
9 or 10 maybe.
Well, so here's what happened. So you've got Mighty Morphin season 1 is basically just Saved by the Bell with Queen Rita and putty people and stuff, and it's stupid. And then season 2 is kind of whatever. But then season 3, all of a sudden there's continuity and things start it was the first TV show I watched that had an ongoing plot that I could see was changing. And then you hit Zeo and stuff really starts getting very intensely. There just is a through line, and that goes, you've got Zeo, and then you've got Turbo after that, where they're driving cars, and that was the really dumb one.
Welcome to Space Zordon Peace Rangers.
I'm not even done though, because then they go then they go into space after that. So what I'm saying is that everybody left Power Rangers at season 3. They jumped off at the good part. I stayed on for 1, 2, 3 more shows than everybody else, basically. And loved it. I thought it was great.
I can't wait to see how many people identify with this.
Yeah, no, let me know. Those of you that have vast knowledge of the...
Where my range heads at? Hey, right. where are my Rangers?
Yeah. Let me know. Let's talk extended universe Power Rangers stuff. And maybe let's start a fan fiction thing, okay? What about a fan fiction channel for Power Rangers? Tommy X Kimberly, some slash fiction.
So you said Power Rangers went into space. If there was a TI faction that was from the Power Rangers universe.
Oh, that's good. Well, Goldar is not a cat, but he's very gold, and but he's not really like a Hakan. Honestly, all of the space people are just so goofy, and there's in the Zeo show, all of the bad guys are robots, and they are somewhat necrovirus-like. But it would be like if the necrovirus, all of the people in the necrovirus were more like C-3PO. Then so they're not scary. They're all just kind of goofy, and they've got gold-plated head stuff, and they do weird dance moves. Power Rangers is great.
I have to get out of this headspace. It's doing things to my psyche.
Yeah, because you like it. You're excited.
Oh no, I'm gonna go watch Power Rangers right after this. Hey, You can follow us on Twitter at SpaceCatsPod for updates and game announcements, and on Facebook for announcements as well. You can ask me questions, Space Cats Peace Turtles on Facebook. On the Twilight Imperium subreddit, you can find our posts, discussions about our episodes, as well as lots of other discussions that happen. It's a fun place to hang out. You can also hang out in our Board Game Geek Guild. It should be noted to people who just listen to the show and aren't like familiar with Board Game Geek, we kind of make fun of our Board Game Geek Guild a lot. And we used to talk down on Board Game Geek in general, but like there is a huge forum on Board Game Geek that like people ask lots of rules questions. There's lots of good strategy talk. Like it is a good resource. So if you've never used Board Game Geek because we told you not to or something, that's probably a bad call.
Oh yeah, no, don't do that.
You should go join the BGG community. But we do our own discussion on our guild, and we have a calendar there that when the tournament is going on, we'll start updating it with games. We have a Patreon that you can join and contribute to the show, and you'll get lots of benefits. Like this episode was voted on by our Galactic Council. So viewers of the show chose the topic for this episode, and that's why we're doing it. For the holiday stream, you can have an impact on the different elements that are included in the stream if you join the Steve Martin Fan Club. If you're a member of the Good Yin Brotherhood, we will play games with you. We try to play them pretty often. We had a really good November where we played like 3 or 4 Good Yin Brotherhood games.
Right, yeah.
And if you are a Space Kitty, you get to produce an episode. You get to come up with the topic by yourself. It's like an advanced Galactic Council where you're the entire council, and we will either record the episode with you or we'll just do whatever topic you want us to do. You can also join our Discord. That's how you get a lot of these Patreon benefits. We're a little bit better at responding on Discord than we are on Patreon. And there's also just lots of fun conversations going on our Discord. If you rate us, we would appreciate it on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. It increases visibility and makes people know about what Twilight Imperium is.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Hunter, and I'm a stand-up comedian in Portland, Oregon. I got some shows I want to throw at you real quick. Every Thursday, actually, that's okay. So like next Thursday, and then none of the Thursdays after that. You can see me.
It's a weird month.
Yeah, it's a weird month because I'm going to be in Arkansas for half of it. But most Thursdays, like normal style, you can see me co-host a show called Earthquake Hurricane that starts at 8 p.m. at Ford Food and Drink in Portland. I'm going to be guest co-hosting a podcast called What's More Metal, which is about taking things and describing how metal they are. And I don't mean like like metal. I mean like music.
Yeah, but you could do the other angle. Right?
I think I probably will. I think I'm probably going to describe the metals involved in whatever we talk about, because I'm not a very metal person. That's going to be December 12th, 10 p.m. at Funhouse Lounge. And that will eventually be on the internet, and I will let you know. The big show that I want to tell you about, in Portland anyways, is on December 15th. We are doing a Christmas party Hanukkah show, which is going to be at my friend Adam's house. It's actually a ticketed event. It starts at 8 p.m. The tickets are $10. Fans of the show that are Portland listeners, some of them have even been to this show in the past when it was in a backyard. Now it's going to be inside, and we're going to have a Christmas tree, and we're going to do a lot of really crazy stuff. There are not very many tickets available. I think there's like 5 left. So if anybody's interested, go ahead and if you want, you should just go ahead and buy them now. Because they will definitely be gone by the time we get to the show day. The day after that, I will be on December 16th. I will be at the Alliance at Alberta Street Pub. That show starts at 9:00, and then I will be in Arkansas. And on December 22nd, I'm going to be headlining I guess it's like a cider place. It's called Black Apple Crossing, and it's in Springdale, Arkansas. I don't even know when it starts at this point, but I know I'm doing that. I'm going to have to do like 45 minutes of comedy, which is an intimidating feat.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Here's a question. Next week's episode, should we delay the episode a little bit so that we can record together in person, or are we going to record this one beforehand? Because we might want to get that announcement out right now. I think I'm going to go ahead and put the warning out that next week's episode may be a day or 2 late.
Yeah.
It may not, But it may be a day or two late because we might wait for Hunter to get into town and then we'll record together rather than he's got all these shows that weekend. It might be kind of a messy week. So it might be a Wednesday or Thursday release next week.
I like that because I think I think it's always more fun when we are in the same place. It's great.
And honestly, there might be more people involved. The rest of this month may be episodes with more people because all of our buddies are going to be in town and we're going to want to talk to them and hang out with them.
Yeah,
so they might just get included on episodes because they're around, which is usually what happens. If they're around, suddenly they're in an episode.
Right.
I want to thank some patrons. I want to thank our Space Kitties, Jimbo V, whatever we've settled on, Dustin Doom, Nathan Swenson, and Yin for Life. I also want to thank patrons Monty, Wagnius, and Chris Woody.
All right. We got Play of the Week. This one is from Jamie Huffman. This is a 4-player game. So we had a 4-player game going with Necrovirus, Arborek, Federation of Soul, and me as the L1. We were each at 7 points, but I was running out of objectives to score while Soul had a platoon of Space Marines stationed on Mechatol Rex. Well, who'd have thunk? I had a guaranteed 3rd secret objective, 2 racial techs, in my pocket, but really needed a good Stage 2 public to put me over the top. At the end of round 5, we drew Conquer the Weak, control a planet and another player's home system. Coincidentally, Soul and I each had a large fleet in striking distance of each other's homes. I struck first, blowing away the defending ships with my fleet of super dreadnoughts kitted out with duranium armor. After the defending Space Marines fell beneath the continuous planetary bombardments, oh, that's great that actually worked out that way. I assimilated their space stock and reinforced with additional soldiers. In retaliation, Soul attacked 000 or Null, the L1 home system, defeating his defending fleet. And while my soldiers defended valiantly, at the end of the round, a single Soul Marine claimed my home planet. Obviously, I could not let this unprovoked aggression stand, and I counterattacked with everything I had nearby and threw it at the invading Soul fleet. However, the dice gods did not favor me, and 3 Fighter 2s were left standing while my fleet bit the dust. Then Soul did his own counterattack. His fleet took the system, but my soldiers held the planet. At the end of the round, we both stared at each other with our exchanged home planets, both having accomplished the objective, but unable to score it. Now, that's the kind of gift of the Magi kind of deal right there, you know? I got you my home system. Yep. Oh, no, that's what I got you. And now no one can score it.
And now no one gets it.
And what have we learned? Don't play 4-player games.
We've learned don't play 4-player games because the other 2 players probably had a great advantage. Actually, I have it on good authority that the Soul ended up winning that game anyways. But don't worry about that.
How dare you tell me that? I don't even want to hear that. That makes boo.
Breaks your heart. Your heart.
Ban Soul. All
right. Hunter.
Hashtag ban Soul.
Hunter.
What?
I'll see you in a week.
All right. I'll see you face to face, you dingus.
You.
I'm gonna have cookies, and you better pick me up from Kansas City, or I'll be mad.
Thank you for listening to Space Cat's Peace Turtles, and thanks to Ben Prunty for the use of his music. You can find more at benpruntymusic.com and benprunty.bandcamp.com. Pax Magnifica, Bellum Gloriosum.
I'm going to be so mad if you leave me in the Kansas City airport. I hate that place. I don't have good luck in Kansas City, dude. Like, I have bad luck there.
Do. We have terrible luck.
We have terrible luck in Kansas City. Yeah.
Remember when Shelton fixed his car with his bare hands?
I actually wasn't there for that, but that's such a good story.
Yeah, he hulked out and fixed his belt line on his engine with his bare hands. There's like a special tool that you have to buy to be able to do that. And Shelton was like, "No, get me out of Kansas City." Fixed. Drive home. We're done.